Hello and welcome to this video on stakeholders. So what are we going to be looking at in this video? Well, this video is part of a wider series about business or corporate objectives. And here we're going to look at these objectives through the eyes of the stakeholder approach. So we're going to consider objectives from different stakeholders' points of views. So we're going to do a bit of recapping on that, and then we're going to look at how sometimes business decisions can lead to conflict between stakeholders in terms of their effects, or there can be conflict between stakeholders of what they think the objectives of the business should be. So let's start by looking at what a stakeholder is. A stakeholder is any individual organization has an interest in the activities and decision of a business. And again, we must be really clear in our minds not to confuse this with shareholders. Stakeholders have an interest in the business but do not own it. For example, an employee, shareholders own the business and can also work in the business as well, but they own the business shareholder. How do we classify stakeholders? Well, typically we look at them internal, those who work for the business or own the business, and external, those who are affected by the business. We could also classify them as being primary or secondary. Primaries have a direct relationship with the business, for example, managers or suppliers, and then secondary stakeholders are those affected by the decisions but not directly related, for example, the government or the local community. And it's often important to recognize that different stakeholders will want different things from a business. So the shareholder will probably want a return on their investment, a rising share price and dividends, whereas a manager may want fringe benefits and share options. Customers will want value for money. Suppliers want fair prices and trading terms. The government will want tax receipts and creation of jobs. The local community will want jobs, but also a consideration about any externalities that might be generated by the business. And if we think about businesses that have a stakeholder influenced approach to objectives, what are we saying? We're saying that the business's responsibilities are considered to be towards all of its stakeholders. And therefore the business must consider all of its stakeholders in its decisions and, importantly, when it sets objectives. So there must be a period of consultation with stakeholders before making strategic decisions or setting corporate objectives. An example of a business that claims to have a stakeholder approach would be the International Hotels Group, and these are their stakeholders in the wider ring here, who they try and consult with or consider when they're making their strategic decisions and when they're considering what corporate objective they should have. And if a business adopts a stakeholder influenced approach, the stakeholder influence should be seen as a genuine concern and not just a public relations exercise. A shareholder influenced approach is not stakeholder influenced approach. It's where the business's responsibilities are solely aimed at meeting the requirements of the shareholders. And as a result, we would expect, therefore, that profit maximization is going to be the main corporate objectives. Why is that? Because higher profits will lead to higher dividends and shareholders will see income growth. And good performance of the company will see its share price rise, which also means that there will be capital growth for the shareholders, i.e. the value of what they own, their assets, the shares will rise in value. On the left-hand side here, we have a nice little diagram just to remind us of how we might go about measuring shareholder value. So looking at sales, margins, and how well assets are being used within the business. We were just pausing that, having a look at the table on the left-hand side. Now, sometimes we might get into a situation where the objectives lead to conflict between the stakeholders, and sometimes actually there isn't a conflict, and actually it's good for both stakeholders, in which case they might like to cooperate. So it's difficult to meet the needs of all stakeholders. Sometimes their needs may overlap, in which case they can cooperate. So for example, the community may support the employees when they're taking industrial action to strengthen their voice. But importantly, there is a potential for conflict between the profit-based objectives of shareholders and the wider objective of stakeholders. Stakeholder conflict occurs when the actions of or objectives of one group weaken the power of another. So, for example, suppliers might want lower prices to try and encourage a business to stay in the UK, but this would reduce the power of shareholders wanting the business to relocate abroad for lower costs. Here are some examples of conflicts. So the first one here, we have managers who want to raise selling prices to maximize profits, but this is in conflict with the customer who will not want to pay more for their goods. Then we have another conflict here, the owner who wants to reinvest profits into the business, but the shareholder will want the profits to be shared out to them. The owner perhaps wants to pay lower wages to maximize profits, but the trade union doesn't think the employees would be happy with this, and they represent the employees. The owner wants to buy stock at minimum prices, and the supplier wants to make profits and not sell stock to them at such a low price. So we can see there's often conflicts between stakeholders. Here are some more examples of conflict as a result of strategic decisions. So maybe we wanted to cut jobs to reduce costs. This is likely to be supported by the shareholders and the banks, but likely to be imposed by the employees and the local community. Maybe we've taken a strategic decision to introduce new machinery to replace manual labour. This is likely to be popular with customers and shareholders, but unlikely to be popular with employees. So we can see that objectives will perhaps depend on whether the business adopts a stakeholder approach or a shareholder approach, and how much power these groups have within the business. We can also see how some strategic decisions can lead to conflicts between the different objectives different stakeholder groups might have. That's it. Thanks for listening.